Hello, I'm Shilpa Vijayakrishnan, and I head the Education and Outreach Programming at the Museum of Art and Photography, MAP Bengaluru. On behalf of MAP and the Bangalore International Centre, I am very pleased to welcome all of you to today's session, Love at First Swipe. This talk is part of a series of MAP talks that is programmed around our running theme, popular culture and expressions. Over the last year and a half, technology has become a more vital force in sustaining our day-to-day lives more than ever, really. And as meeting in physical spaces became void overnight, we took to digital platforms not only in order to stay in touch with all of our loved ones, but also to recreate experiences that were previously rooted in physical presence. Technology has long transformed many aspects of our lives, including our collective expressions of love and desire. But the pandemic has propelled us into a world where dating apps have become the primary avenue for many of us who are seeking romance and intimacy. Today's session explores these evolving modes of cosmopolitan desire and expression in India, and how individuals may be cultivating socially distanced dating etiquettes and much more in this new environment. Firstly, I would like to warmly thank Smita Vanniyar, who has very kindly and very graciously stepped in for Bishaka Datta, who is unfortunately unable to make it due to a personal emergency today. Joining them in conversation are Ankit Vengurlekar and Dr Dhiren Borisa. To briefly introduce them, Ankit has worked as a science and technology journalist for 15 years and has been co-hosting Love Aaj Kal, a podcast dealing with love, dating, and relationships for over 4 years. His unique experience and exposure in the industry made him witness to the technological disruptions that influence the changing landscape of relationships and dating in India. Dhiren is an activist, poet, and an urban sexual geographer. He currently works at the Jindal Global Law School as an assistant professor and is also an honorary visiting fellow at the School of Geography, Geology, and Environment in the University of Leicester in the UK. His research engages with sexual mappings and the makings of cities from an intersectional and decolonial lens, both among queer spaces in India and worldwide. Smita works at the intersection of gender, sexuality, and technology with a focus on digital rights, holistic digital security, and digital storytelling. They currently work as a project coordinator at the Association for Progressive Communications and hold a master's degree in media and cultural studies from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. I would like to thank all three of them for giving us their time and agreeing to be part of this session. Their detailed bios can be found in the chat box. I'd also like to thank Anand, who is our Indian Sign Language interpreter today. And I would like to request all of you to address any questions you have for any of the speakers using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. They will be addressing questions in the last 10 minutes of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Smita to kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shilpa. Just to add to what Shilpa was saying, in the past, since last March in 2020, so much of our lives have moved online. Some by choice, some by compulsion, and some because, of necessity. And this includes like work, personal life interactions, our grocery shopping and everything, right? But today we'll be focusing more looking at how has the pandemic kind of shifted the way in which we think about romance and intimacy. It had already, there were already shifts with the digital, with the digital spaces becoming more accessible. But with so many of us going online so immediately and like in such a short span of time, how are we rethinking romance? How are we rethinking desire and intimacy in the current times, right? And what role are dating apps playing in this? This is it's one of my favorite topics, to be honest, dating apps. My master's thesis looked at dating websites. Apps weren't a thing at that point, and how queer women particularly used dating websites as a space for like forming their own communities. From that, this was in 2015, and from then we have shifted out of websites. It's primarily apps today, right? And I don't know if you remember, but in 2020, in 2020, March, April, one of the posts which was going around everywhere online is like, don't text your ex, right? And that was that was there in all social media platforms. But the funny thing is that in those 2 months, I received messages from so many past OkCupid and Hinge and Tinder dates and flings and hookups that it made me rethink this don't text your ex some more as well. And I'm really excited that Ankit and Dhiren are here to dive more into this. And let me maybe direct the first question to Ankit. Ankit, you explored love, dating, relationships, sex, and desires in your very popular podcast, Love Aaj Kal. What are your thoughts on the shifting landscapes of desire specifically in relation to dating apps? And what kinds of shifts do you think are occurring? Behavioral, attitudinal, bodily? Yeah, please share your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question, Smita. And really glad to be a part of this session. I must put it out there. I'm sure people who are watching this are doing this in an exclusive environment and hopefully have the headphones on so that, you know, the content that we talk about may be explicit. It doesn't reach ears or people that it may not be suitable for. So with that out, I'm used to giving disclaimers because the content we speak about on the podcast is also kind of risky. And my first statement would be, we are now a super, super, super horny country right now. And in fact, one of the biggest headlines as the United States entered their summer, which is anyway the biggest party/travel period of the year, that coincides around their 4th of July, Independence Day. Literally, I mean, so many social observers, anthropologists were talking about the intimacy deficit and the horniness pandemic of sorts that's going to be unleashed on the society, because never before in recent history, as far as memory can be jogged, have people been cooped up inside this way. So on Love Aaj Kal, we get a lot of personal messages on Instagram, on our website, and Astha and I, you know, it's difficult to read all of them, but there's a broad trend here, Smita, that we are seeing. Number one, desperation. Number two, a lot of frustration, because, you know, while we are sitting here as urban, sort of, you know, digitally privileged people, access, know-how, all of this still remains a huge challenge and a luxury for majority of the country. We are a country where not all of us have a room to ourselves, right? We are cooped up in joint families. So people who are even married, they barely enjoy any intimate moments with their spouses just because it's such a tiny house and everybody is cooped up in the same house, etc. And the young and the horny have it super, super, super difficult, right? Imagine you're anything between 18 and 25, and literally the first sort of intimate moments or moments of desire or moments of exploration are going to happen with your partners. And those moments, so to say, have been stolen from them because of the lockdown and because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of frustration. There is some bit of consolation prize that everybody is in it together, but it is really affecting mental health of a lot of people. And I think that's very, very concerning.
Thank you very much, Ankit. Dhiren, you know, sorry, as Ankit was saying, I used to live in Mumbai till like last year. And as you were speaking, I could only remember how Mumbai seaside faces are always littered with couples under umbrellas. And they're always facing the sea and the umbrella is towards the people behind. And how over time, even the police and the cops there have learned not to disturb them because that's the only space you can find, especially in a place like Mumbai where real estate is so expensive, right? Dhiren, to ask you, your work looks at the geographies of sexuality and specifically looking at queerness and caste and how do these play out on dating apps. Do you think that this has shifted in any way during the pandemic, or has it been more emphasized because of the conversations around vaccine and pandemic and who is, you know, clean and unclean? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, Smita, and thank you, Ankit, for starting off so beautifully and laying out I was more thinking in terms of the blurb that Shilpa introduced the webinar with, in terms of how we have changed our ways of negotiating our lives, dating, scene, etc., etc. One way in which something that has come to us is social distancing, a term which is in such currency right now. And I went on thinking that, is our love also social distance, or was it always social distanced? And that's something that I want to think through in this webinar, particularly that love often is seen as very radical, love often, but is curtailed, as Ankit pointed out, through lack of privacy, from the sanitized spaces of love, thinking about hooking up and then the raunchiness of that. I want to think about that love has always been social distance. We have been taught to love particular kind of people. So every time I'm teaching sexuality to my class, I make a Tinder account for them. So I make a Tinder account for them. It's anonymous, and that's how I learned sexuality, right? And I am a very old gay man, so come from a generation of shifting from Orkut to Facebook. So that era of shift. And I started my trying to find people from the loneliness of the small town through Facebook, creating anonymous profile, creating a persona for myself through text, images, numbers. I'll come to that later. But here, when I make an account for the class, I ask the class swipe people left and right. And there's inadvertently particular ways in which we swipe people right. The particular kind of bodies that we swipe people swipe right. It's another thing that you also see Modi ji on Tinder so often these days, but we will come to that discussion later on, maybe in another conversation. But those kinds of forms through which people find certain bodies desired are socially institutionalized. It builds on, as Smita pointed out, builds on the histories of touch and untouch. Right? You might touch somebody on the screen, but might not touch them in person. Right? But even to be able, and I'm talking in terms of not just dating app like Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, or anything, thirst traps on Instagram. And I think Instagram itself is a thirst trap. But who can be thirsty on these apps? What bodies can project themselves that, you know, I want to desire somebody and I am desiring right now? It's all being manufactured through these histories of violence through which love itself has been codified. That we might think that for a change, our families are not interfering, that they are not deciding whom we are going to get married to. Our love is still being dictated by the same logic and norms of the society that we think that we have outdone or we have left them behind. That's our family's prerogative, that there's shallow narrow-mindedness, that they believe in caste, etc., etc. But our every negotiation, even today, is built through the same logic of whom we find sexy. What names do we find sexy? So when I made my first Facebook account, the anonymous account I was talking about, I chose an upper caste surname because I knew these are the bodies that are desirable. Right? If I write Singhania, if I write Bajaj, this is what we have fed with Ekta Kapoor serials to see that, you know, these are people who own big bungalows and fancy cars. Even though I don't have a picture, I'm talking to other fake profiles like me, quote unquote fake profiles. We are very real in those profiles. That I feel that's the only way community is formed. Another thing that I talk about social distancing here is that right now we might feel that we can't meet people physically. Living in a small town in a countryside, queers still feel that they can't meet people. Right? So in those ways in which I was creating anonymous profiles versus already practicing physical distance, that you knew that you're not going to meet this random person you're chatting from some village or some place in Jharkhand who might have some access to internet, therefore created this anonymous profile. But the distance was socially manufactured already. And I think we also need to emphasize that while we are talking about here. I think I've taken too much of time.
No. These are very important points, Dhiren. Thank you very much. Actually, when you were talking about fake profiles, when I do digital security trainings and workshops, especially with peer people, I like to distinguish it as alternative profiles versus fake profiles, where in one it is for yourself, whereas in the other it is with the intention of creating harm to someone else. And I think that sort of distinction is very important, especially on dating apps and social media spaces where already trying to clamp down in the name of security, right? Like show your real face, show your real name, show your Aadhaar card, show your passport. and for everything and anything they're asking for this. So I think like, I think this sort of a language is also important to like challenge those things. And to also talk about how love has been codified, right? When we look at the algorithms themselves, all the algorithms, most of the dating apps today actually work very much in the binary of man, woman, right? And even if they give you an option of self-identifying your gender, they ask you at the end, do you want to be shown with the men or do you want to be shown with the women, right? So what is the point of self-identifying? Why are you joking around at the end of the day? And on top of that, there's the other element of, especially when it comes to caste, how does your appearance, what does your appearance tell, right? And even if your appearance is not telling anything, what is it being read as, for that matter? As someone who's a Dalit non-binary person, looking at me in Delhi, it's really funny. Their first assumption is that I'm African. I'm like, wrong thing, but why are you assuming I'm not Indian? And I thought this is just a thing which I would face in the physical spaces, but it also plays out in the online spaces, where they ask, which country are you from? I'm like, hi, with so much difficulty, I learned Hindi, and you still ask me this question. And I want to like actually talk a little more about now that we've moved online, right? Like now, how do you think there's a way in the way in which we use dating apps has changed? Do you think in the past 1.5 year now, since March of 2020 specifically, do you think our idea of intimacy and trust and how our desires play out has changed? Ankit, you want to go first, and then maybe Dhiren, you can add to it?
Sure, absolutely. Smita, I would love to hear a lot more of also the online studies that you've done and the time you spend navigating the cyberspace and insights from there. So maybe after Dhiren and me, we would love to hear your personal sort of insight into this as well. 2 or 3 major trends. Number one, I think I love this Hindi word for definition, paribhasha. The paribhasha of intimacy underwent a fundamental shift during the pandemic, at least what was evident from the hundreds and thousands of messages that we got from young boys and girls. And I say that because the number one, which we completely take for granted, the number one step of intimacy is to speak and to be heard. The number one step. Is there anything more sexy than just to be heard? Right? That is such a challenge as well in today's day and age across all the rifts that we have in society. So that became very, very pronounced and prominent throughout the pandemic. As people were cooped up and the entire physical networks dried up, they found solace and comfort and confidence in absolute strangers, not just in their PIN code or their city, but anywhere in the world. I think one of the first quick product changes most dating apps did was they removed the geographical limits. I'm sure Dhiren can talk about the geography of love a lot more from that perspective. But they took out those geo filters or geo blocks, right? Otherwise, if you're in Delhi, you would hang out with people in Delhi. If I'm in Mumbai, and likewise. But now suddenly a person from a smaller town, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 town, could very well have a conversation with anybody, anywhere, with probably no intention of meeting ever at all. But the step one of intimacy, of speaking your heart out, just having a stranger listen to you, maybe just comfort you, that was one major trend. Number two, the second biggest trend was the spike in the number of users reported across dating apps and online platforms from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns. So dating or online dating apps mostly appears like an urban phenomenon, right? Even there, we absolutely suck because as Indians, we just don't know how to date. We don't have dating etiquette. It is not imparted to us. It's not taught to us. We are not a dating culture. School we used to have a Rose Day and a Valentine's Day. And then suddenly, obviously most Indian families, they're like, how dare you talk to the other gender? And suddenly you're 20, 21 years old and you're expected to get married and start popping babies like it's an ATM. So we have a very unhealthy engagement in the space of cis hetero. It's a very unhealthy situation. So dating किसी को पता ही नहीं है. Nobody knows what are the etiquettes or the syntax for that. But despite all these shortcomings, I think the relative veil of anonymity that dating apps or Instagram, which according to me is the world's primary dating app, and sliding into DMs today has become normal parlance. At some point, it used to be for risque behavior. That's how mainstream Instagram behavior of dating has become. So number one, the intimacy of talking to strangers saw a huge upward trend. And number two is smaller towns, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, their comfort and onboarding of a lot more users, them finding themselves comfortable and confident to be seen and to be talking over here. And number three, of course, which is very, very predictable, is the time that they would spend on it. So raat ko at night, mostly around 11 p.m. or midnight to 2 or 3 in the morning is where most Indian dating apps saw a huge uptick in usage, because throughout the day, understandably so, if you're in a lockdown and you've got family members all around you, very difficult to fire up a dating app and left swipe, right swipe, or to keep chatting. So these are the three main trends that we've come across from people messaging us.
Thank you, Ankit. Dhiren?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think Instagram, of course, is a big dating app, but I think every app right now is a dating app. Like you're playing Ludo online during pandemic with random strangers, it is dating app. You're building up intimacies, and for queer people, that's the way in which we have always built intimacies, thinking to find strangers. So when Ankit spoke about how the first product change that happened as soon as pandemic struck in was that Tinder, Grindr, all of these places started giving you explore options. You can discover the world. Go to Barcelona and find out other people out there. And for queer people, they were hunting for people, right? Where are people? Where are my queers anyways, right? And I'm sure it's much more like deficit for cis hetero people. I think they're more underprivileged than queers. That for us, we have been trying to avoid familiarity as much as possible, right? Because for many communities, and especially communities that we all come from, love has often translated into depth, right? And not just, so you read Navnita Mokhal's work on lesbian suicide, such brilliance. You talk about, think about the ways in which doubleness of sexuality works, think about Akhil Katyal's work, etc., that people would try to block everybody who lives in their neighborhood, in the close proximity on these dating apps, not to be visible in those circuits, to be able, and therefore I feel that when one was already doing those kinds of networks, like kind of filtering out the geographies within which you can forge intimacies, trying to find out somebody from a distance, because that will avoid that kind of a gaze, which is extremely penetrative and also disastrous. People were already manufacturing their geographies of sexuality, right? So what the explore option did was it gives you just an additional thing. Now you can, instead of going like manufacturing a limited geography, you could go somewhere else altogether, right? With no intention that you're going to ever physically meet or even talk to each other. So I feel that's very interesting. And to think further on the question, and that all stems from, because Ankit started talking about frustration, desperation, and I think that's something very key to it, is an inherent sense of loneliness that we are struggling with. And it could be anybody, and you're trying to forge ways in which we can somehow negotiate that loneliness, and digital form has made that slightly possible. For some people, I would not say for everybody, right? And it's not just a question of access to technology. We have seen there's a remarkable change in ways in which technology has been accessible to people, but who can be visible in those spaces, who can articulate desire so visibly and comfortably in those spaces, and who is going to be blocked again and again. Every time you're talking on who's on, as because Ankit pointed out, so many people are sliding into people's DM on Instagram. Whose DM is going to be entertained and whose DM is going to be not entertained, which is violation and harassment, and which one is like, oh, I was waiting for your DM, such a hot profile, I'm going to respond to you. It's all being, so what I see is in that we are solidifying and fortifying the ways in which we already knew how to practice desire by just employing technology. And then this caveat of the digitalness that has suddenly erupted in our lives. It was always there, but it has that magnanimity with which it has erupted to say that, we have become cooler, we have become like, started talking to everybody, we want to be heard and we want to be listened, like all of those tensions, but to not forget that whom do we want to speak to, whom do we want to hear from, etc., is also still staying there, what Anika Javere talks about in Practicing Caste, whose touch.
Thank you, Dhiren. Actually, that reminds me of something that a friend of mine used to say, that any app can be a dating app if you're interested enough. And I think that's really true, because I know people who have connected over classifieds like Locanto and like, and Facebook is like, of course. And then Ludo, chess, people have messaged on chess apps on the phone, which don't even allow for texting actually. But, it's really interesting. And when we talk about like the, what Ankit and Dhiren, both of you said about how some of who's allowed and who's not, whose DMs are harassment, who knows the dating etiquette online, right? And this dating etiquette, of course, the larger idea of it comes from the Western spaces. And in terms of like what is dating, right? Would you and also like what is desire, what is sexual, what is erotic for you, right? Sorry, I lost my train of thought somewhere. Yeah, I'll come back to that. But then I want to actually ask another, a little more thing is that some of these things are not new. Some of these things are new for cishet people, right? The loneliness that comes when you're in a space with people, the loneliness of not seeing yourself reflected anywhere around you, right? The loneliness of like wondering, will you ever find someone else who desires similar things as you desire, right? Of not of like having to move across borders, across cities, across like physically, digitally, whatever means possible, to just talk to someone who understands you without you feeling like you're the wrong person, like you shouldn't be even the one existing, right? I think these are all things which a lot of queer people, a lot of trans people have already been experiencing and talking about, but within their own circles. And suddenly when it's been magnified and like it exploded because with the pandemic, I actually like in my personal spaces, I saw a lot of my cishet friends suddenly struggling. They're like, what is this? I don't understand how to handle this. I'm like, but wait, I have 10 years of experience here. Let me tell you some stuff, right? Because I was brought up in the Gulf, and in the Gulf, any website that even mentions the word gay is banned. And in times like that, like when I was like a teenager, these are things which are actively telling that you're criminal, you're wrong, you're not supposed to exist, right? And you find forums, you find chat rooms and like forums where you fake your age and you fake your name, and you go and talk to people because and people talk to you because of kindness, because they know what it means to have been in this space, right? During the pandemic, when suddenly like my flatmates and my friends couldn't meet people through dating apps, suddenly they felt like, and also like then the question of like meeting through dating apps, I think Ankit, you said that how a lot of people use the upsurge in usage of dating apps went up at night, right? But that also would have been mostly through men, because are women allowed to use phone at night? Because who are you texting at night? What are you watching on your phone at night? Is a question which is asked to all women and girls. Unmarried, married does not matter. There is surveillance of some degree or another unless you live by yourself, right? And even that the freedom comes if you're paying your own bills. If you ask someone else to recharge, that's again gone. No? And I think like these are some intersections which kind of slip through the gaps when we're talking about intimacy online. And they are very big gaps. So it's actually like these are the main sparks and the other things are like spikes. No? There are several dating apps which also said that there's been an increase in the percentage of matches, there's been an increase in the percentage of messages being sent, that women are initiating more messages, And these are studies and like surveys done by Tinder, OkCupid, Hinge, Bumble, the Match Group, which owns most of them, was seeing all of these things. But I think once again, these kind of fall apart a little bit when they come to India, because and like not white English speaking spaces. I think it really does shift a lot. I also wanted to when reading upon this, I remember reading an article which said that, is this the time when we are moving more towards slow dating because of the fact that you can't meet? Are you talking more? No, but Ankit said that we are all super horny. So how do these multiple truths exist together? And also, how do we play out both of these things online? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Dhiren, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Smita, for laying it out and so beautifully. And immediately what I was thinking around was that, while gay men are going to gym, and I'm talking about gay men because they all want to be bulked up right now and want to look sexy because that's how you can be swiped right. Like all the gym boys are opening OnlyFans account, and with a significant proportion of their subscribers being gay men. So one is also seeing amorphous ways in which sexuality is being played out, that all of these, the horniness that Ankit was speaking about is being laid out in all of these forms of just for fans account, OnlyFans account. Every gym boy you talk about has one OnlyFans, or at least desires to have an OnlyFans account. That has also been one of the ways in which people are earning money. Brilliant, right? But also ways in which people are negotiating this. So how things are working out. I am also thinking about that how the lack of physical space, or not having the kind of physical spaces, for many for whom those were the only ways in which they could forge intimacy. And I'm talking about, again, men who have sex with men, broad categorization, not necessarily classifying and articulating as gay, LGBT, or whatever the narrowness within which those definitional categories come from. How would they renegotiate when you have to be forced to be inside, where you're living with, you're married and living with wife and children, but you also have a lover that you would occasionally meet every day, returning back from work in the last coach of the metro between Rajiv Chowk and Kashmiri Gate, and forge intimacy out there. Like, what has happened to all of those conversations? Where have they shifted? And what form does it take? One of the ways a lot of people that I interacted with in those several local train, metro compartment travels, is like a lot of them started making Facebook Messenger groups and started doing video calling each other. So they would have a time in the day, in the night, where they would assume, and there would be multiple calls like that. And they're like, come on, whoever is online, let's see each other, let's get horny. And you would see, or go on Twitter, you will find a lot of leaked videos of horny men overflanting everywhere. So like, especially all these gym boys also. So I'm also thinking about what are these different forms through which people have tried to continue those kinds of intimacies that they had gone away with, because a lot of these people will not be on dating apps that we are conventionally know of, but would want to have some sort of intimacy in some form in which they can access desire. So that's something that I am currently thinking. I'll add more after Ankit. There's something that was in my trail of thought which I've forgotten right now.
No, that's a great point, actually, Dhiren. And I was sharing this in our pre-interview when we were discussing what do we speak about on the webinar. I'm really worried as a technology journalist who's tracked the growth of internet and its usage and its myriad ways of jugaad and the way it is used. This Facebook group for digital intimacy is an example. I'm really worried because the number of people who have suddenly gotten bolder and comfortable to share their nudes or to have digital remnants, a breadcrumb trail of their photos and videos of very sexually explicit photos and videos, something that if the world was operating normally, they would have never, ever probably done. But now it's like, meh, I mean, the world's going to shit. What have I got to lose? Let me do this anyway. That's very worrisome. That's very worrisome because the same rifts that exist in society, digital or online apps or anything, is purely a mirror to the offline world, right? Largely. And in a lot of ways, it deepens the inequities of the offline world as well. While it democratizes, but it also deepens and accentuates those. So the same, sort of group of people that can be exploited in the offline world run a major risk of being catfished or exploited on the online world. And I'm hoping against hope. I hope this doesn't ever happen. But there will be a moment when a lot of these, photos and videos will be leaked online, and lives will get destroyed, and family ties will get severed, and it's going to get very, very ugly. So unfortunately, in the heat of the moment, all pun intended, in the heat of the moment, while people are doing risky behavior, indulging in that online, they're probably not thinking of the potential ways this can be misused in the future. And knowing the history of the internet, misused it shall be. Over to you, Smita.
Dhiren, do you want to add what you had missed earlier? Thank you, both of you. I think, like, Ankit, I understand the concerns that you're pointing out, but I also think, like, maybe we should take this as an opportunity to actually think about sexual expression in the larger gamut of freedom of expression, right? Because as someone who does feminist holistic digital security trainings, one of the things that we're very careful about, and I say we because it's a group of us, and there are quite a few trainers who are exploring this and expanding the ideas of what it means to do feminist digital security training, no? Because otherwise digital security is very prescriptive. It says, don't do this, use that, download this, install that. But that's not security, because you're not understanding or acknowledging or addressing the core issues. You're treating the symptoms. Kind of like what our government is doing by building smart cities. Did you ask the women and children whether they wanted smart cities? No, you didn't, right? And similarly, I think, like, what would be needed right now is to see how we can maybe increase the conversations on how do you sext safely? How do you send nudes safely? How do you, do texting, sex texting safely, right? Do you want to explore other ways? Do you want to, now, and this doesn't mean that you have to install secure apps per se. It also means that, when you're using your phone, you're using WhatsApp, what can you do in these spaces, no? And these are conversations, once again, that when we do workshops with, like, queer persons, particularly queer and trans persons, we already talk about this, because they are the risk and the consequence of them being outed, exposed, is much higher in a very general sense, right? And I think maybe this should be our opportunity to then talk about this some more, rather than hey, this is a worry. And this is not to say that scare people into using safer ways of, like, sexting, no, or sending nudes, but to talk about, hey, have you thought about this? And in all likelihood, they have thought about this. They have probably thought about what would happen, especially women, queer people, trans people have thought about what would happen if a nude photo with their face visible is leaked out. No, either they have decided it doesn't matter right now because, hey, I might die next year, or they have just decided that, let me deal with it when it comes. Let me cross that bridge when I come to it. Because right now, the mental health is much higher. No, so I think that I really do think that this is the perfect time to talk about digital security and sexting. I actually, when I was living with flatmates, the way I got them to use Signal is by saying, hey, you all are meeting random men on dating apps. Why don't you use this to message them? And that actually worked. And my friends are not tech people, really. They are filmmakers and things. So it actually works. So I think, like, and also another thing is that there are no right or wrong. There are apps which are ideal, of course, where we can sext and, which are made with these thoughts in mind. But I think, like, if we really think about it together collectively, using the jugaad that we all do anyway, I think there are ways to, like, kind of manipulate existing apps to do what we want to do with it. And we anyway have to do this as people who live in global south, because the apps are never made with any of us in mind. let alone like queer trans people, not even like the Indian cis het men, no, in spite of a lot of them being Indian cis het men in those spaces. And then you talk about, and then comes the question of accessibility, not just accessibility in terms of language and the digital like devices aspect of it, but accessibility in terms of access for people with disabilities. No, and the reason I'm pointing this out is because oftentimes we leave a lot of people out of the conversation just because we don't see them as much, right? And that, or they are siloed into smaller spaces. Like, you know, I know like a lot of persons with disability who use Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups to talk and to connect, because Facebook and WhatsApp are accessible with screen readers and like, you know, things like that. I know they do a lot of nonsense, but like this they have kind of done. And so, and because of that, you may not see them as much on dating apps, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. No. And so when we're talking about desires, it's also a question of whose desires are even now being not included in our conversations. No. We have another 5 minutes, and like I thought it'd be interesting if we end by saying what would be our ideal dating app, sexting, hookup, romance space, or what are like 1 or 2 things you would want in those sort of you know, if you were designing a space like that. It doesn't have to be an app, it can be a website, it can be, I don't know, many other things, but what would you want?
Oh, I would love to go first. Rent a pigeon service, an app with which you can take and print photographs, put them in lifafas, lick them, seal them shut, and rent a pigeon to physically send it to people. Yep.
I think WHO would tell you to use the gum instead of licking, but sure.
And also animal welfare boards would be very against it. So be cautious about that. I feel, and I don't have quirky response like Ankit, but one thing that I feel is there's so much of shame around sex and sexuality. And that's often limiting the ways in which people are able to even acknowledge their desire and work upon it. So the kind of fear that one has gone through, fearing that what if my image news get leaked, or how should I approach somebody, etc., etc. There's so much of inbuilt shame, and I think as society, we need to do something around this shame business, work around it, but also think about ways in which we are able to acknowledge whom we are desiring, whom we are not desiring, whom we are even thinking about when we are talking about desire, whose desires matter in the end, and to think about, like, you know, can there ever be any technology that can actually work? For instance, Grindr is a photo map, right? It's a map, which is an acronym for Museum of Art and Photography, and it shows you 100 consecutive people. And once, while I was studying in JNU, I asked, queer women asked me, like, you know, we don't have apps like this. All these gay men have access to this technology because they have resources, and therefore they can buy most of this technological whatever. I said, why don't you block every man that you see and take over that algorithmic space, because it's all that space. We will have to reimagine, use our imagination, and take over the world of desire, and not with shame.
Thank you. It's actually like, it was really interesting because I had the same question when I was younger. I was like, there's Grindr here. And the thing is, there were apps which were towards lesbian and bisexual women. But I'll tell you the difference in the comparison, because I did a comparative thing between Planet Romeo and like this app called Pink Sofa, which you enter Pink Sofa and has this wholesome photo of 2 women. It looks like they'll find you a girlfriend, a child to go along with, and then let you go. And like when Planet Romeo had like, it had about 24 options for kinks and fetishes. Here there were like 7 options for children, kids, how many kids you want and things like that. And they had only one option, one tick box where I could indicate that I'm here for casual sex. No, and so it's really interesting how like supposedly queer apps are also so gendered in the way they understand man and woman, and of course everyone in between is just like has supposed to fit in here and there. I think like any app that I would want would be modeled after what Mia Mingus said, who's a disability and queer rights activist. She says that when we're talking about the politics of aesthetics and the politics of desirability and beauty online, why are we striving this? Shouldn't we collect striving for magnificence? And the idea of magnificence is so much more broader and so much more individual, and we can define what is magnificence, right? Why are we sticking to the same ideas as queers, particularly sticking to the same ideas of beauty and aesthetics, right? And I found that I think I would want that to be the cornerstone of a dating space that I design. Yeah, we have one question in the Q&A, and so Lakshmi Krishnamurthy has asked, any difference in the initiating of a conversation between men and women? Also, any difference in the attitudes of men and women in the interaction? Who wants to take that?
Well, okay, let me jump in and cut the awkward silence. I think the difference is men just feel entitled enough to initiate a conversation. That's number one. Number two, it cuts both ways. We can also expect men to initiate and start the conversation just because they have, ingrained the same patriarchal model and gender roles that whether or not a man wants to, he has to perform that particular role. But there are apps such as Bumble that I think after you match, the woman has to send the first message or the match disappears in a few hours or something like that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ankit. Dhiren, anything you want to add to this? When I was, this is from a broader kind of an anecdotal evidence. I remember when, heterosexual friends of mine, women, who joined dating apps, and this happened in front of me, which is why I remember. They joined OkCupid, I think, and my friend made a profile. She swiped on some people, and she matched with a few people, sent a few messages, and went to sleep. When she woke up after like 2 hours, she had about 150 messages inbox, and most of them didn't say anything beyond hi, but they wanted to say something, right? And on the other hand, and when this was happening, another a heterosexual cis male friend of ours was saying about how he saw his friend swiping literally like right on all the women who he saw. And I think the broader answer is that a lot of what happens in the physical space often gets reflected online, because we are the same people who are entering these online spaces. And until there are efforts made to educate on both the fronts at the same time, in the online as well as offline spaces, certain disparities would unfortunately continue to remain in some ways. And it's nice when apps give us the tools to select what you want. Do I want others to be able to approach me, or do I want to be the only one who approaches first, right? Because this would also then be taking into cognizance that everyone might not be comfortable messaging first, or they might have their own ideas. So I think it's important that we remain dynamic in how we think about it. We have another question. How do we navigate conversations wherein Grindr or other dating apps were used to subject users to physical violence, especially in cases where the politics of intersectional identity and personal spaces mingle?
Should I take that?
Yeah.
It's very interesting because many people do not use their pictures. Many people don't. There are a lot of faceless torsos on a Grindr that one sees. But I happen to use my pictures, and I also have my Instagram account linked where you would open it, say awkward Dalit queer. Right now, often when one has explicit about not just one's sexual desires, one's identity in such ways, I often find a lot of people reaching out through anonymous profiles, also threatening and saying that, why do you have to mention the D word here? Because you are bringing in caste in this, and therefore you're making space sexually violent and unbearable for me. My desires suffocated because of you, etc., etc., etc. But as Dalits, we are very nonchalant now. We are very proud, and we don't care about any of this shit. We have enough cleared shit of this paper, shit of Savarna folks. So there is this always this kind of pressure that when you would make yourself explicit in those spaces, you would open yourself for violence. So a lot of Dalit people and people who come from extremely marginalized backgrounds would never try to speak about their locations, would rather hide, right? So you wear fancy clothes and click beautiful pictures because you're going to read a Savarna person through looking at my picture, right? So if I go dancing to a party and if you're going to see my dance moves and see a bow tie on me and leather boots and imagine that I'm somebody upper caste boy who's desirable, etc., that's your problem. But these are the ways in which we also are trying to avoid any form of violence that can come our way. Right? Speaking at the same time, be it Tinder, cis het men, or gay men who have sex with men, gay men, whatever, who would flaunt their caste identities on these spaces. There would be hot Jat, top Gujjar, 8 inches, flaunting their phallus all over the place and spilling it over and saying that that is not caste, but caste comes when marginalized communities try to take over the spaces of desires and claim desirability on themselves. So during pandemic, and I'll just tell this small instance, and I think I should stop because I end up taking a lot of space, I feel. I think all Dalit Bahujan people feel that we are taking over a lot of spaces because none of these spaces or tables are made for us. Like during pandemic, and I stay close to Delhi University North Campus, the profile was circulating very heavily on Grindr because the question was on Grindr. The profile was called, the title of the profile was, the name that you chose for yourself is Brahman Ka Chhora. So I'm the son of Brahman, as translating. Now, interesting, a lot of people, Jats, Gujars, showcasing masculinity because that gives your hyper-masculine, gym-toned, beautiful, fuck. You have a huge stamina, so you're going to fuck for longer hours, etc., and long phallus, which they flaunt also. This person in the description part of his profile says, कि हूं तो मैं बामन का छोरा पर शौक जाटो वाले हैं. I'll translate it that I am the son of Brahmin, but my shock, which is one idiom through which sexuality has been transacted in Indian context, which is habit or shock and interest, are that of Jat. So that kind of, I'm Brahmin, but I'm Jat, and I'm understanding what kind of caste solidarity is being forged between this Brahmin, self-asserting Brahmin boy person on this app, on a gay dating app, with the Jatness, knowing very well that historically, the way in which the metaphor of the shock was used was to relate it to, say, Nawabi shock. This interests are of the Nawabs, but you want to simultaneously distance yourself from that Nawab heritage, which resonates of the decadence culture of the Nawab, also the kind of Muslim, which right now we do not need to talk about them, but getting apprehensive about when somebody talks about themselves as Dalit. So I often use this slide where I show this Brahmin ka chhora or top Jat with somebody who's saying, I'm a Valmiki boy. And when you read that description, you understand what violence this person speaking the question is saying, that, kya smart hona zaruri hai kya? Like, is it necessary to be smart? Is it necessary to be beautiful? And like the kind of the ways in which caste has made this kind of traumas internalized. Or we can't be desirable. We can't be, as Smita pointed out, magnificent. Right? We can't be brilliant on these spaces. Then the violence is already there. Right? And none of these spaces can undo this violence. The only thing that we are learning so far is to live with it, cope through it, and survive like we are surviving this pandemic.
Thank you, Dhiren. Actually, related to this question and what you were talking about, there we have one more question, which asks, borrowing from Christina Dhanraj's essay on caste and dating apps and online dating spaces, what do you feel about the difference in caste signaling in dating apps versus matrimonial sites and services, given that the latter has more explicit mentions of caste?
This, apart from Christina's beautiful piece that is being mentioned, love letters by Dhruvo that were published in 11 Ways of Love. Brilliant. When in one of the letters, Dhruvo writes that, before I fell in love with you, my desire was already fixed through caste. Right? Good looks are fair-skinned. Good background is what neighborhood you live at. Good skills are how well articulate you are in English speaking, etc. All of these forms of meritocratic arguments are already been built through caste, right? So you would chat with somebody and you want to meet, right? we can't meet right now because of this, but gay men are having orgies. Let me tell you, Grindr is flooded with orgies of all kind. They don't care about all of these norms of social distancing. They're horny. They want to do it. That often you want to meet the closest person you can find, and you're chatting with somebody, right? And you met somebody who is just 1 kilometer away from you, and another person who is, say, 3 kilometers away from you. You might end up going and meeting the 3 kilometer far person, and not the 1 kilometer far person, but because he might be living across the railway line. And across the railway line, there might be a basti where the person might be living. You want to disassociate. So there are ways in which that matrimonial sites where our parents are pushing out, or we voluntarily are going into, where castes are being classified, like the advertisements are being classified through caste. These app business are making it very subtler forms, where we in a make-believe world for us, where we feel that, caste is not operating in our desires, we are free from it, we are not that narrow-minded like our fathers and grandparents, etc., etc. But every way in which we are reading people, accessing desire, is manufactured through caste. You don't need to spell out what my caste is. But if you think you can talk to me because I look upper caste, you're already building it through caste. Once a queer person told me, why do I wear bow ties and call myself Dalit? And I knew exactly that's the point. We need to sabotage these spaces and take over them, because they don't even know how to do their own business.
Thank you, Dhiren. This is yet another reason for me to get into bow ties. Now I have bow ties. And I think like another question is like, when we're looking at matrimonial sites as well as dating apps, all of this are played out on technology, right? And technology and the people who build technology are still operating from the point that technology is neutral. We have moved way past that many years ago, but I don't think it has clicked in the minds of people who are writing the algorithms and the softwares and building the spaces and interfaces. Because if you assume technology is neutral, it's also coming from the same place, like caste is not there anymore in the cities. No, it is from the places, oh, why do we need LGBT pride? Because we are all equal, because that's how it apparently. But until you address and acknowledge the fact that that's not how it is, the technology will continue to reflect the same power structures, the same discriminatory pattern which is there in the offline spaces. And in many places, it is justified by saying that, oh, but this is how we are making it more human. It's justified by saying that we are collecting all of this data so that we can serve you better. It's the same logic which is given everywhere. No, why are we asking for caste? And it's ridiculous, because you're acting as if this platform is completely neutral, as if you are completely neutral as a person building these platforms. And I think it's also important that we think about how the confluence of caste, colorism, and technology comes together. No, like if I take a photo with someone who's fair skinned, I will show darker, or they will show overexposed, because cameras are not meant for dark skin. But in India, it's not just dark skin. Dark skin has implications. It implies caste, it implies class, it implies whether you're educated, whether you speak English or no. All of this are assumed through your dark skin. No? And when you're using only this as a basis to connect with others and form intimacies, to form marriages, apparently, then what are you actually going towards, right? And when you don't think about it, then what are you leaving out of your own thought process? What are you leaving out of your own desires then? We have 2 more minutes. And there's one last question, which I think maybe we can answer. How do people who have social anxiety and are stuck with families make their long distance online dating exciting and alive?
House party pe games khelo.
House party is not secure though.
I'm still thinking of the last question and what Smita just said, and I just want to add something to it. Because none of these apps, be it for dating purpose or otherwise, have caste or violation on caste as in the community guidelines. So you can't report those profiles who are targeting you, the violence that you're subjected to on these platforms, because the way in which it was designed, they never considered caste as a factor. Even like when you go abroad, you suddenly become person of color, and you flatten and draw. The brownness becomes like, this flattened identity where you do not acknowledge your own caste privilege. Most of these people who are working in Silicon Valley, who are persons of color, Indian origin, also come from particular caste backgrounds. And this is how also enters this kind of lobbying, why this kind of caste violation should not be there, because you do not want to acknowledge it. Another thing, because the marriage question was there, I don't know if you're familiar with this, there are a lot of marriage of convenience pages on Facebook, and they're very interesting pages to actually study, because they're like this marriage of convenience where you're trying to find, I'm gay, my parents are forcing me to get married, let me find some lesbian women that I can marry, you do you, I do me, right? And so therefore our lives are sorted. And you go to these pages, and they just replicate everything that your matrimonial websites or classified advertisements did. I am a Brahmin girl looking for a Brahmin gay boy to get married. We can do our separate ways comfortably. I am a Banya girl living in Madhya Pradesh. My parents are forcing me to get married. Or I'm a Banya boy living in Jodhpur getting forced to get married, looking for Banya or Jain preferred. Right? And you understand that what kind of barriers you're still ready to cross, and what kind of barriers are non-negotiable, right? That for many of us, and I started with saying love is death, and that was for intercaste love or interfaith love, that here love can still be somehow manipulated by finding some way of convenience in the marriage, which is so heteronormative and patriarchal, but you can't undo the caste hegemony. That is a boundary that you will never be able to cross. And that's something we need to think about when you talk about social distance and physical intimacy, because your physical intimacy, even though when it was not social distancing was the norm, was already social distance.
Thank you, Dhiren. Because I think the person might be expecting an answer on the social anxiety. I really think that is something you should really talk about with your partner as well, because it's so different for different people. No, what causes social anxiety? Is it video calls which cause you social anxiety, or do audio calls are audio calls more anxious for you because you can't see their face, your partner's face? Is talking at night hard for you? If it is, then do you want to talk sometime earlier in the day? I think there are several elements to this. And I think what is exciting is also very different from one another. I was texting with someone who found playing chess exciting. I didn't find it exciting. It was thinking for me, no? So I think like you should really be, I think one thing if I can tell you is that talk to your partner about it. And you should be able to talk to your partner about it, because if you're in a relationship, and this is one of the bare minimums that you can serve in a long distance relationship, no? Where you can share your emotional needs, or if you want things to be exciting, you can also plan that out together. And that's also the excitement of a relationship, no? All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much, Ankit and Dhiren, for this very exciting panel. And it was lovely talking to both of you, really. And I hope really we get to connect in other spaces, online or offline, as time allows. And
I know I'm sending a request to each one of you to feature you all on Love Aaj Kal podcast. I would love to pick your brains and talk to you individually. So I had an absolute blast. Thank you so much. I'm going away much more enriched with so much amazing information from you, Smita and Dhiren. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful time and gathering. I really enjoyed.
Thank you very much. Shilpa, should I hand over to you?
I was just saying thank you all. It was brilliant, and we're very, very happy to have had you. Lots of insightful, exciting things. And thank you to the audience for tuning in, for being so engaged, sending us all your questions. We hope we answered most of them. Right now, we'll just sort of be closing this session, and the PIC will have their side on for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Anand, for your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand, as always.